Well, do you record the seminars? Because it's 10 o'clock.
It start automatically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was you are now being recorded as a seminar speaker.
Okay, good to know.
Okay, so shall we start? Or wait for a couple of minutes?
Why don't we start and people can catch up? I really don't know how many people come.
I
You don't know.
don't know.
I don't know.
Me either.
It's up to you.
Okay, let's wait just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Should we go ahead and begin?
Oh, let's wait for 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes, all right.
I liked what you said about technical leadership founded on character.
That's really what we're doing,
Yeah.
you know. Entrepreneurial mindset gives you an opportunity to unpack that with people, and you know, it's usually a 30-minute conversation on what do you mean by that, and that's helpful. But and I don't know that, so it doesn't have technical leadership founded on character doesn't have the same pizzazz or play, and so, but there is something to that. I've had people in the network. Do you know J.D. Yoder?
Yeah.
That have said, we're not really doing entrepreneurship, we're doing something a little different here. So, I think it's just the mindset basis that serves so many activities. You just tell me when to begin and I will start. And with this size group, I will get to know everybody. What's your name, sir?
Anil?
Anil?
Yeah.
Faculty member, grad student,
I'm a PhD student,
PhD student, what are you studying?
aerospace engineering.
And what's your research topic?
I would like to do an aerodynamics, so I'm yet to finalize my guide.
Okay. Well, good to meet you. And Neil.
Anil, yeah. Nice to meet you too.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Yeah, it's good to see you. I think we meet even later
We
today.
do, yes.
That's fantastic. Good. Good. And sir, in the back, your name?
My name is Samuel.
What's
Samuel?
Samuel?
Yeah.
And student, faculty member?
Yeah, I'm a first year PhD student.
First year PhD students. Terrific. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Yes, let's start. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, good morning, everyone. You already know his name. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Doug Melton. Dr. Melton is a program director at the Calm Family Foundation since 2012. And he earned his PhD in electrical engineering, right?
Yep.
And from University of Wisconsin. And his team created adaptive multi-channel system identification and signal processing and control strategies. Dr. Melton is going to talk about the 3 C's of an entrepreneur mindset today. And in particular, how to teach one of the 3 C's, the curiosity. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Melton.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And with this size crowd, we get to have an intimate conversation, and I always look forward to that. So it's a pleasure to get to know everybody in the room, and we'll be able to talk about some of the topics that I will share. So first of all, let me just jump into a quick story that actually is connected to Raleigh. So I was working in a company and helped found some of the ideas within a company. We grew to about 80 people. We were working in active sound control. We would go to plants, we would hook on speakers that would, you know the physics, superposition, put in an equal and opposite wave and it will cancel. And so instead of putting a muffler on things or maybe a big sound canceller, we would put speakers and those sorts of things and signal processing to cancel the sound. So this is a technique that actually brought me to campus. Let me first start off by saying, have you ever heard of the term situational curiosity? Situational curiosity. Sometimes you're thrown into a new situation and you find out you don't know enough. You don't have enough information, and they call that an information gap. And so that situation makes you curious because you need to know something, so you start digging in. It's the foundation of research. We created some intellectual property, created some algorithms, patented them. This company is going pretty well, and then a new opportunity shows up at a company that is located in this city. So I come here. I walk into the room and I see a jet. The project we are to work on is actually a Cessna Citation 10 jet. This is very, very different from the work that we had been doing where we were canceling sound. In fact, it wasn't to cancel sound from the jet outside, it was to cancel sound inside the jet. And so, I don't know if you know much about, this has a Rolls-Royce turbofan engine, twin spool engine, and these rotors, there's 2 rotors in this, and just like anything that's rotational, it's very hard to balance these things perfectly at all speeds. And so what you end up with is, imagine this engine sitting on the side of a lightweight aluminum skinned fuselage, and as it's rotating, these slight imbalances sometimes will cause forces that impede on the fuselage, generating vibration inside, and you get some sound from the engines as it goes through its different speeds in RPMs. So this company that we work with here actually had some mounts that were based on piezoelectric stacks. And so you could hook these mounts and they would statically hold the engine, but dynamically you would isolate that, because as it rotates and there's an imbalance, the stacks would push out or they would pull in appropriately. So it seemed like there was a dynamic isolation from these forces to the interior. That's, I will tell you, caused a lot of situational curiosity. Completely different than my other work. We had to learn how these things work, where paths were, completely new. There's a whole story about creating value that's attached to this particular work and curiosity. And I'll come back to this story as we kind of move through the talk. It's a pleasure to be here at NC State. It's been a long time in coming, perhaps. NC State is well known for its reputation in entrepreneurship, and you've probably seen things around campus, but I actually think it goes much deeper than just the entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial programs. When I go visit a place, I try to look at the alums. I mean, these are people like yourselves, maybe in a few years. And so I'm not going to go through all these names, but leaders of Bell Labs, presidents of institutions, creators of ray tracing. So when we were just getting started and understanding, like, how do you create a shadow with ray tracing and create a computer rendered image? Leaders in that. Leaders of organizations. This is a more recent grad. This one actually caught my eye because this is Jeff Mobley. I just looked up alumni and I found these different stories about your alumni here from this institution. Works on curiosity and perseverance. You know, these rovers that landed on Mars and go around. I love the fact that one is named Curiosity. This is the point of this talk. In fact, it reminded me of a book that I've been reading. I've not finished it. It's by Adam Stelzner. He's called The Rock and Roll Engineer. So if you want to look up somebody that's really interesting and social media savvy, this is an interesting fellow. And he's known for a particular thing that he did. And if you want these slides later, I'm happy to provide them. So, involved with Curiosity rover. And you may know how the rover is landed on. The need was to, how do you land a rover on a rocky area? You don't know exactly where it's coming down. It's coming through about 3,800 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's got a serious materials problem and it's coming at high speed. You have to slow this thing down. And they had a problem at JPL. And the problem was, how do you do this? We don't have any technology to do this. And Stelzner was the one who advocated for something called the sky crane. Maybe you've seen it before. The idea is deploy, shoot, slow it down. Then it's almost kind of crazy. Then you've got cables that lower this rover to the ground. This entire process is many stages, lots of complexity, but it was the solution to the problem. And if you've watched any of these landings or you get a delay, of course, from what's actually happening, but it is the 7 minutes of terror, they call it, as this process. Is it going to work, or are we just going to waste billions of dollars as this thing crashes? Curiosity, and in fact, Stelzner in his book has a whole section devoted to curiosity, which is part of this particular seminar. You can find even classroom topics where somebody's taken this problem, converted it into a dynamics problem, and said, let's make sure and integrate this in engineering education. All those people we saw, all those alum, I will guarantee you that as they've driven to their successes, they've had to employ something called an entrepreneurial mindset. This entrepreneurial mindset is not about entrepreneurship. It's not necessarily about creating a company. This is different, and maybe you haven't stopped to think about this. This is about the way you think, and think in any situation. It works when you're in a corporation. It works when you're working in a government setting. It works when you're dating. This entrepreneurial mindset it's something that forms kind of habits of mind and what's top of mind. And so can we educate for that or not? The idea that this foundation has had for years, since 2004, and has sort of spread to about 50 partner universities is kind of captured in this saying. It says, it's almost like the mantra. The engineer we need has an entrepreneurial mindset. I mean, that starts you thinking about opportunity and impact. Every problem you think about, every room you walk into, you say, what's the opportunity? What's the impact of this work? And it's a top of mind habit. But when that's coupled to engineering, thought, and action, that is the engine that really makes this work. Those two lines are basically the engine of most progress. You could map that to individuals who have created so much progress over the years. But it's really, to be effective, it's a team sport. You know engineering is a team sport, right? Sometimes there's the Lone Ranger activity. You can go out and create something in your garage, but more often at the levels that we are working at, in the topics you are working at, you're working with teams. Companies, large teams sometimes. So it requires collaboration, it requires communication, and we even think that this has to be founded on character. If you have somebody that's really entrepreneurially minded and they don't have character, you've created a very difficult rogue agent. You don't want that. Character has to be woven throughout. So this is sort of the mantra that we have. And I thought I would show you a faculty member who's been doing this, teaching this way, changed the way they taught, changed even what they thought themselves. And this is a couple minutes.
I've done a number of things in my life. I spent 4 years in the Navy, 6 years designing machine tools in industry. I've worked in automotive engineering. And no matter where I go, the people who add the most value, the people who have a spirit of innovation, are worth 100 or 1,000 of those who just come to work, do their job, and go home. I am David Mikesell. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering, and I use the entrepreneurial mindset to prepare young engineers to add value in industry or wherever they go. The things which mean the most to me from my own engineering education were the stories that my professors told who came from industry. That just made the entire topic light up. I still remember some of those stories, a number of those stories decades later, which made it come alive, made it a whole lot more than just a formula or just a good principle to observe, but made it something that made a difference. Another principle which I like to illustrate from my own life, I guess, I could come back to another story, is concept generation. My own experience was such that too often I was happy with the first idea that came to mind. I want students to have at least 30 ideas, preferably 100 ideas. They don't have to be fully fleshed out with a complete set of engineering drawings, but a sketch, an idea, one modification. When you first say, come up with 100 ideas, that sounds huge. Then you show them a handful of tools, and all of a sudden they say, oh, I can actually come up with 1,000,000 ideas. when I'm talking, when I'm interacting with local industries, once they understand what this is, I have found them uniformly to jump on board and say, yes, that is important to us. Not only is it important to us, it is important for your graduates to have this background, this understanding. The larger sense of creating value is important to them. They also don't just want engineers who come in with the blinders on and execute whatever task is assigned to them. They also want the engineers who are going to have the larger sense of innovation. Look at all the things that we do. What can we do slightly different, which is going to give us an edge on our competition?
Okay, if you just stop there, it's a nice, wonderful, glossy piece, but you go back to the example that I was talking about with the engines, the jet engine on the side of the fuselage. There's a whole storyline there about focusing on value. We had a company that was comprised of about 80 engineers, mostly PhDs, masters, and we were building products, we were doing joint ventures, and we were missing a component. And the component was, were we focused on the value that we were creating? We had what I would call techno-lust. It's a term where you just love your own engineering design. You create something and you go, my God, this is fantastic, and it's got all sorts of dials on it. And we were there. That's where we were, and I think we missed, I won't go into the details, but there's a lot of technical details that are connected to that. So that notion of creating value and that being the driver for things rather than secondary, that was an expensive lesson. Let's continue. So we use, in this network of 50 partners, we had to have a common language. It's kind of like you go to these different universities, some are liberal arts, some are mission-based, some are big institutions like NC State, ASU, Georgia Tech, and you go, how are we all going to talk the same language? We need some sort of Rosetta Stone or something. We need a framework. And so we ended up finding a framework that had entrepreneurial mindset as the banner item, the top yellow item. And we said, we've got to define this a little bit more. And so we started focusing on that, and we said that creating value piece that you just saw, that's got to be in there. And then we'll ask these partner institutions to figure out the educational processes that make this important. And there's a piece around connections, and the piece I want to focus on today is around curiosity. It's a fun piece to focus on. So, what determines your degree of curiosity? Well, since we've got a nice, intimate group, I'm going to actually ask a few of you. Sir in the back, what's your name, sir? Yeah. So, are you a curious person? Where does that come from? Is it fixed, or can you learn to be more curious? What do you think?
Got a 50-50 shot.
50-50, and it's not a right or wrong. It's just your opinion, and it's valid. What do you think? Do you think you can become more curious?
Yes, I think I'm curious because I have lots of questions that I need an answer for it.
So yes, exactly. Are you doing research?
Yes.
So all sorts of questions come out of this research, like why is this way, right? And so you can easily generate these questions in your research. It's that situational curiosity that causes you to generate questions. What determines your degree of curiosity? Is it just a situation? That's a rhetorical question. Let me ask another one. I asked this. Can you learn to be more curious? Well, let's do a survey. And there's no right or wrong here. I just want to see a show of hands. Let's say a show of hands positive, like, yes, you can learn to be curious. Let's see. Oh my gosh, this is an easy group. It's almost unanimous. Can you teach somebody to be more curious? Huh. You say yes?
I think so.
I think so too. If some of you at certain ages, maybe you have niece, nephew, kids, there's processes that you can teach and you probably employ, maybe with or without knowing it, that teach curiosity. Oh, is there a good curiosity and a bad curiosity? You know, have you ever heard the term curiosity killed the cat? It's not so positive. Or maybe you met people that are just so curious all the time they don't get anything done. Maybe a better than putting good or bad is helpful or unproductive. I don't know. These are questions that I hope when we walk out the door today, you might have some ideas on these things. Okay? All right. So we're going to focus on curiosity. This framework that I described, we had to have a couple types of curiosity to talk about. And we said, if you're entrepreneurially minded, you're probably thinking about where things are headed. Where's my technology headed? Where's my career headed? Where is, demographics? Where's the society? Where are we headed globally? You're probably thinking about our changing world. And so you might have that flavor, the first line up there around demonstrating a curiosity about our changing world. That's a particular brand or flavor of curiosity that might be, maybe you've seen it in people, maybe you've seen it in yourself. What about the second one? Explore a contrarian view. Many of you have advisors right now. You walk in and say, this is my research solution, and perhaps they might say to you, what else you got? Maybe that's not the right way to do it. Maybe the accepted way is not the right way. Let's explore something completely different. So that contrarian view is a brand of curiosity as well that serves entrepreneurially minded individuals because that pushes you out of the status quo into something different. Curiosity has been studied, and there's a legacy of literature about curiosity that exists from about the 1950s. More recent work like this, where there are about 3,000 individuals their curiosity was explored, and various facets, the 5 things on the left, were what this particular work explored. Are you curious because you're just excited to learn? That's a joyous exploration. Are you curious because deprivation sensitivity is that information gap? I'm missing something, so I need to learn about this. Social curiosity, thrill-seeking. This particular study categorized and tested different flavors of curiosity, and then it ended up identifying groups of people. On the right-hand side, they said, it turns out that there's infinity groups that happen after all this testing. And some people, they lumped into a category called the fascinated. I would wager that we have a lot of those people in this room because they tend to be academics. They're fascinated. Problem solvers, empathizers, and avoiders. Turns out there's about 25% of each of these categories from this significant study. Other work in this area has explored something called the sweet spot between apathy and anxiety. And maybe you know this from the classroom work. Have you ever been just dead bored in a classroom? No. If your advisor's here, you say no. But maybe there are some classes and some people that you're way over here, there's no surprise element, there's nothing new, you can get into this apathy mode. The other side of that can be problematic as well. You can have so much curiosity and so much, I don't know what's going on here, that you end up on the very far other side of called the anxiety side. And so people have said, well, it's like a virtue almost. It's like, how do you find the middle ground where there's a sweet spot for this? And there's numerical evidential work around this kind of thing. So it turns out there's a couple dimensions of curiosity. There are probably more than just a couple dimensions, but let's put these things on a matrix. There's a dimension of curiosity that I already mentioned at the top, situational curiosity, where you're in a situation, you might explore something because it's joyous, you might have an information gap, but it's because of the situation. And the far right-hand top is around the dispositional, almost native, what might come with you innately. I think we all are curious individuals, I think that's part of our nature. But is there a movement back and forth between those two categories at the top of that? We'll talk about that. Another axis of dimensions of curiosity could include epistemic or diversive. Epistemic is often about knowing something like, why is this going on? What are the underlying causes? And diversive is, what if? What would happen if I put a fork in the microwave? We should figure that out, or a marshmallow. So there's these, and then you might go back to the epistemic and say, why does this happen? So these are two different dimensions. Just understanding curiosity, if you're in education or even a learner, you want to understand these two different dimensions. And you might, in engineering speak, you might say, well, a lot of first principles tie into the epistemic portion, and a lot of kind of intersection or contrarian or opportunities, research might lie into the what if piece. Circumstances are the situational piece, and dispositional is the habit of mind piece. What the important part of this graph is the next click of the mouse here, and it's that if you put people in situational circumstances, they can, and this is the evidence. When I asked you before, could you learn curiosity? The answer is yes. It's demonstrated. Psychology's proven this. And some people might be innately more curious, but that's okay. You go exercise these muscles, and then you can become more curious permanently as a disposition, and it can serve you. So it's kind of like an exercise process. And so to be a vehicle for this conversation in this seminar, let's use an exercise routine. Monday through Friday, I'll just use this as a vehicle to convey this notion. All right, so on Monday, the Monday exercise is asking why. Maybe every Monday you go in and say, why is this going on? And if you have students, don't you love students who ask why? And if you're a researcher, it's your job to ask why. So we'll talk about that. I want to talk about why is actually one of the most important exercise regimes here in a moment. But let's go through a few more. What about trends? You may go back asking why the trends are, but let's just talk about trends. It is a tool. It's an exercise tool. Call it a curiosity development tool to focus on trends. In particular, if you're wanting to demonstrate a constant curiosity about the changing world, trends are your means. So we'll talk about, I'm going to give you an example of this. So I'm just not going to fly over. We're going to dive into an example of it. We'll use an example of being a contrarian, and we'll also use an example of what if. And I'm going to hold Friday back for a second. I won't tell you the exercise on Friday. And hopefully that bothers you a little bit. Okay, so let's exercise curiosity. We're going to start. Here's our Monday exercise. Does anybody recognize this molecule? Again, this is not a graded exercise. I'm not an advisor here. I'm just, throw a random one out. You might see this label at the gas pump. It's not, anybody?
Ethanol.
It is ethanol. Okay. So let's have a quick conversation, and this should be interactive. Why is this molecule important? Why ethanol? Why do we care about, why bother with this particular molecule or putting 10% of it in our one primary fuel source? And why mess around with it? Well, it's got a lot of energy, right? I mean, it's got a lot of potential energy that can be exploited from it. That's one reason why it's involved in fueling things.
You break it and it makes water instead of something nasty?
Yes, that is exactly. So there's an environmental benefit, perhaps perceived environmental benefit. I hope you're going, wait, I don't know. And why do we have so much focus on this particular molecule? Why not another one? There is a legacy called curiosity journals that use reflections. Here's a couple of people that have used curiosity journals in the past. And a lot of what, if you read any excerpts from these journals, it is they took time to go back and say, why? And it's a very reflective process. I don't know if you do this. We've got so many grad students in here. You probably keep a lab book. I know I kept some materials, but I don't think I was quite as diligent at asking why so much. I was trying to do. There's a strength. If you put this in your exercise regime somewhere, and that comes out and is exhibited. So curiosity journals, why do domestic, this is just one from myself. Why do domestic airfares seem lightly correlated to total distance? I can buy a ticket to Raleigh and it costs more than flying across the country. What's going on? I don't know. What is the business model that's going on here? And so it just, once you start recording, codifying, making a habit out of these things, it can really serve you. I'm not going to go through my entire airplane experience, but recording and doing this are really valuable. It'll be game changing. You get in the habit of this, you'll be a stronger engineer, a stronger educator. I assure you. Let's talk about trends. So trends are just a beautiful way to visualize and exploit something. I just continued with the ethanol example. I grabbed some data that is on the ethanol production. And when you see a graph like this, if this graph showed up in your data, whatever data it was, wouldn't you go, what the heck is going on? It begs the question of what happened in 2000, 2002 over this time period, and something must have stopped happening or something. Looking at these trends can be a terrific way to exercise curiosity. This is just a Tuesday's exercise. If you do this in your educational processes, maybe some of you students might end up in faculty positions or in a research situation. You do this all the time already. You're looking at anomalies, you're looking at trends. Then the stop and reflection process on that is valuable. I love it when I'm posed with something don't you love it when you don't understand, like what's going on? Here's this graph, just so you can digest what's going on in this graph. This is the weight of cars versus their miles per gallon at different years. So back in 1975, everybody kind of knows the cars were big lead sleds, right? And their miles per gallon, not so good, low. And then as time progresses, something happens. The miles per gallon start going up, manufacturers start making these cars lighter. Okay, so that makes sense. And then as time progresses, what created an increase in miles per gallon from here to here, from 1980 to 88? And then did something happen that miles per gallon levels out and it doesn't really continue to increase and cars get heavier again? I hope that bugs you, right? Doesn't it bug you a little bit? It's like, I want to know a story. So if you stop and go, let's figure this out, and you hand stuff to students that does not make sense, there's the information gap piece. This is the second piece in the study. That's around, there's some sort of dissonance going on. It doesn't fit. I will tell you that a lot of it has to do with regulatory and CAFE standards, because I was bugged by this. And I actually worked in this area for a little while. Okay. All right, let's be a contrarian. Wednesday contrarians. I think the whole group, I can tell just by the looks in your eyes, you're probably all Wednesday contrarians. So, I like the next example. This one, the idea is push a little bit. Here's one I like. An article that says, why Amazon delivery drones won't work. And that's the kind of negative push that is very productive for curiosity. These are just tools to use in teaching or your research. Easy tools. Last one here, just to kind of give another ethanol example, is the what if. what if we switched? What if we did something different? And so what if we use butanol instead? What are the implications? Sometimes they're not all good. What are the opportunities and the challenges? So a collection of tools. How many of you are familiar with Simon Sinek? Okay, a couple of hands. I'm gonna play this then. I was not sure why, I told you the Monday's exercise, why deserves a little extra attention. And I thought I could tell you about that, but I think I'm gonna show you a abbreviated, edited version of this that I hope you appreciate.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery. And this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operate in it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? But those who lead inspire us. Whether they're individuals or organizations, we follow those who lead, not because we have to, but because we want to. We follow those who lead, not for them, but for ourselves. And it's those who start with why that have the ability to inspire those around them or find others who inspire them.
Yeah, there's a lot more to that talk. I gave you a very abbreviated version of this, but the why deserves kind of a special place in this process. And even with the ethanol, you know, the why do we care, then how do we even create ethanol? You can go through the processes and say how, and you can talk about what results, you know, this ethanol, the corn product turns into this. But starting with the why is always the beginning point of the entrepreneurial mindset, I believe, certainly that curiosity piece. So there's our exercises. I didn't share with you yet Friday. So let's talk about Friday. There is a host of tools to use, and some of those include stories. How many people have a pattern of, have you ever been asked, why did you become an engineer? Anybody in here ever been asked that question? What is your answer? Somebody that's nodding yes, give me a quick version of that.
Genetic.
Did you, family have engineering?
Solid.
All engineers.
Yes. And you know how there are families that say, I'm a 4th generation military person. Right?
Yes.
Well, I'm like a 4th generation engineer.
Okay. But that's not the why. Is that the why?
You asked the reason.
Okay. Okay.
Is that,
Who else? Yeah.
So sometimes you can find the why after the fact, right?
Yes. Yes, I appreciate that comment. I mean,
It doesn't have to be.
that you may not innately know. Yeah, right. I love that comment. Anybody else in here? Why did you become an engineer?
I wanted what I was doing to apply to something.
Okay. When you say what you were doing, what is that?
Well, I started math. Math was fun, but
You wanted it to apply to
I
something.
wanted it to mean something.
Interesting. So there's a meaning piece. Okay. Can I ask you?
Yeah, I choose engineering, mechanical engineering. Till a long time ago, I forgot why I chose it. It's my college. And
There's a story. Every one of you probably has some sort of story about why you're into engineering. My story started out, I'm good in math and science. I'm going to be an engineer. They make a lot of money.
yes.
I'm honest, right? My story has changed over time. My story had, at some point became, I want to understand how to create value for others. And there's something different. It's like, okay, money's nice, at least at some level above that, it's okay. But there's something more connected to purpose. But these stories, whatever your story is, it has merit, it has value. It can be even connected to salary. It doesn't matter. It's your story that connects to why, or maybe stories that highlight an idea. The reason this is up on the screen. There was a story about a particular country that had, and maybe you might be familiar with this, a lot of anemia, so deficiency of iron in blood. And the engineers or the people that were behind this project said, we're going to put iron in, when you boil water, put iron in the pot. It helps, you consume that water, it helps the anemic. But that was not very acceptable with this particular culture and community. So they fashioned it into a fish. And this iron fish actually has this meaning of good luck. Suddenly, this became an acceptable practice in these cultures, and this became a solution. Telling that story is a beautiful part of, I didn't do this justice. Look, if it trips your trigger at all, look this up on YouTube, and you'll see the whole story. But what I want you to recognize is there is a storyline. Whether it's about you being an engineer, how a problem is solved, the storyline, don't discount stories as entertainment. Stories are fundamental to the human experience. So stories are another method. That's on Friday. Stories, even within an evidence-driven classroom culture, can be highly valuable. And this connects to WHO evidence. I'll throw a few other things in our slides so that when I give you these slides later, you can go back and look at them. We probably don't have time enough to go through each of these tools on Friday. One that I love is Hans Rosling's Gapminder. You want to talk about a story, how the washing machine changed the world, or you want to talk about a story how an epidemic changed the world and how countries are progressing. This is a fascinating tool to use. It's actually a software tool that is, every time I put it in the hands of somebody, student, faculty member, encourage them, they'll spend 30 minutes, they get absorbed in this. Their curiosity just goes off the map. Don't you love questions that kind of are provocative when coupled with an image? What would better than human hearing be? I don't even know exactly what that means. And then you couple that. I worked in the area, as you know, of sound and vibration, so these questions. Friday's exercises can be all sorts of things that are visual instead of storyline, and say, what's happening here? And we use a variety of tools, faculty across this network that are teaching curiosity, use a whole host of tools to illustrate and prompt that curiosity. This is just exercise, developing this. So you need some tools. You need some barbells. Again, I won't get into the details of this one, but using AI as a tool of kind of what's going to, how will your work be shaped. Demographic data with visualizations. A lot of these things are found on engineeringunleashed.com, where people develop cards. And so one card that I love, it's a resource that faculty use, is called the QFT. It's called the Question Formulation Technique. If I were to give you an image, maybe of a wall socket, and it's got 50 plugs plugged into it, and it looks like a nightmare at Christmas time because there's something, there's all these electrical. You see this thing and it usually bothers electrical engineers like myself. It's like, oh no, what is going on? but it prompts a whole series of questions. There's a process that you take any device like that and you run it through a structured process of how do you develop questions, how do you vet the questions, how do you answer the questions, and structuring that process is actually another exercise to develop curiosity. So my whole goal here was just to introduce you to some methods that people are using for curiosity. It's part of this entrepreneurial mindset. It's not the whole piece. We would need hours to continue on with this, but I wanted to be able to introduce this to you as just a concept that might change the way you look at things, or if you end up in the education role, will change the way your students look at things. And there's a whole network out there that is working on this. About 4,000 engineering faculty members are working on this process these days from all sorts of universities. And it's not so much the institutions, it's the individual faculty that are just tying in and connecting through this process. And so our hope together, our shared vision, is that in 2035, this notion of what we call entrepreneurial engineering, about creating value for others, being curious and connecting ideas together, this is not foreign to people. Hopefully, this habit, mental habits, will just be part of engineering. We'll just call it engineering. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much. I am open to questions, conversation, but thank you very much. Yeah.
I love seeing some of the tools for bringing this more into the classroom and just sparking curiosity. I'm wondering if you can comment on best practices for assessing curiosity and the impact you're having on your students and whether they're developing this habit.
So yes, let me comment at two levels. This entrepreneurial mindset, how do I measure your entrepreneurial mindset? Really, really hard, right? But when you dial it into something like curiosity, there are measures of curiosity. And actually, since the 50s, this work has been around. You can take, if you break it down into elements, just like anything, you can actually make some measurable, you can tell some measurable differences after an intervention, after a program. Being kind of in the mental or mindset space, it's hard to measure. But I think we're all called to, like, let's explore this together as an experiment. If you kind of say there's something to it, then we ask people, educators, invite them into this experiment, and that's why these people are doing this. It's measurable. It's not at a level where you can measure it precisely. And sometimes that's dissatisfying to engineering folks. But if you talk and collaborate with the people that work in social areas, psychology, a variety of areas, they have measurement techniques and they work. And so that's the answer.
Thanks.
Anything else? Great question. Yes.
Could you briefly give your timeline? Like you said you were an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
And you also did some car stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're
I'm on a third career right now.
Okay.
Yeah. My timeline, so when I was in grad school, and I like the question, when I was in grad school, the reason I went into engineering, by the way, everybody has a different story. I went into engineering because I was good in math and science and because I love sound. I love music, sound, and that drove me into the engineering part of it. So I ended up in grad school and ended up working in a company and helping found a company. And I served as the R&D director for this company. And that's about 4 years of the chunk in there. And then for an additional 17 years, I ended up as a faculty member teaching wireless communications, signal processing, and I thought there's something missing. Turned out that it was this kind of stuff. The foundation came to the campus. I had meetings. I was a faculty member, perhaps like yourself, listening to somebody talk about this. Maybe it was not as formed as it is today. And I said, that's what it is. And so I actually made the change to the foundation to continue the work So I left academia, went to the foundation and continued the work. So yeah, this is a third career. Who knows, maybe I have more. But is that helpful? I don't know if that's the timeline you're looking for.
Yeah, that's accurate, or, right.
Yeah.
Where did the cars fit in?
So when I was at Kettering University,
Yes.
that is GMI or GM. So I ended up doing R&D on some automotive stuff.
Okay.
And ended up in data processing with fuel cell vehicles and with some cars and stuff like that. So, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
In the leveling of the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the Thursday you wrote R. Why?
Thursday, because if I would have used T, I think it would be confusing. When I used to be in, actually this is probably a throwback from the registrar that we had at our university used R for Thursday. So I've always used R for Thursday.
We used to use H.
Oh, you used H, okay, yeah.
Many years, it's T and then WH.
I like the question. I like your curiosity is being demonstrated. Yeah.
So I taught in France and I taught here.
Yes.
And the approach to curiosity is very different. And so French students can solve very difficult math problems, and the reason why they can do that is because they spend hours solving just that, right? And that's not very conducive of curiosity. They just train and they become, very effective, but just at doing math, right? And here I see students who are much more curious, but then struggle more with the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
How do you marry these two things?
So I don't think we should cede any ground on the importance of fundamentals and first principles and rigor. I actually believe that sometimes this becomes a motivator. That's my conclusion, and I think that's supported by evidence in our network that says if you get the motivations right, then the other fundamentals, like basketball, you have to have the fundamentals. You have to know how to dribble the ball and do a layup, right? And so but what motivates you to do that? There's something else besides just dribbling the ball and doing layups. So it's a long answer, but I believe that they're not actually at odds. I think what I'm presenting on this mindset is complementary to developing better skills.
And it's really the curiosity that drives skills.
There's a quote by a famous speaker that says curiosity is the engine of progress, and how it drives things is fundamental to human nature. I believe that.
What do you do when a student tells you, they ask you a question, and it's obviously, why does this work? And you respond and say, why don't you figure it out yourself? And then they take that as a negative.
Yes.
Yeah, because they want to know the answer, but they don't want to put the work in themselves. They want you to kind of talk to them and bury it deep within their brains so they don't have to do any work to figure it out.
This is
That's not really curiosity.
Yeah.
That's some level of it, but it's not a level that we offend them when we tell them to figure it out.
This is
That's not good.
I get your point. I've had a number of faculty that I've approached that say, I think my teaching evaluations will go down if I do some of these things, partly because students might feel the focus is off the technical, and there's this assumption that they have that my value as an educator is purely on the technical content and to deliver it like I'm a vending machine and I supply this to them. I get the question. I think the answer is there has to be a cultural change. I mean, what's still up on the screen is actually the answer, but it's a long play. So I get the pain point.
I think they're very used, not all kids, but a lot of kids are very used to vocalizing almost any thought that goes in their brain without asking themselves, can I figure this out myself? Do I need to necessarily spill this out?
Your dean this morning said, NC State has a terrific K-12 outreach program, one of the best in the state for STEM education and engineering. And actually suggested, might there be an avenue for this, even starting before somebody ends up in higher education? So it's a cultural change, it's an entire pipeline, it's a big challenge. But
Interesting.
Yeah.
Depends on the person too. Sometimes having the person who vocalizes a lot in class is kind of good, it keeps you motivated. But sometimes it's obvious that you want to tell them, look, this is a question you can answer yourself.
Absolutely.
And you don't know how to do that without offending and getting, if you care about your teaching reviews, which I don't.
You don't have to put, are we being recorded?
We probably are.
And other thoughts, concluding thoughts, we need to wrap up.
So, Mary just shared about the experience in France. So, and I'm from Korea, and there, the problem is that student doesn't ask a question, doesn't raise hand, don't ask question, and they just go home and study themselves. When I come to America, it's totally different. Students ask why so often. The problem is not asking why. They ask too much. And what I think the real problem is patience. Learning needs patience. That's what I think. But they always need instant answer, like he said.
Yeah, they want instantaneous knowledge deep in their brain.
Right. And when I say, okay, why don't you figure out? And their curiosity decrease.
On NC State's website, there's a whole section dedicated to resilience. And I looked at that and I thought, what's the basis for resilience? What's the basis? I think it's actually a very deep answer to the question why. I mean, why does somebody continue to persist when they have failure? There's something about the resilience that I think is connected. So maybe they ask why too often about things that they could discover themselves, but the more fundamental things that get down to purpose and why you're doing what you're doing, that was kind of the reason I played the Simon Sinek piece. There's something even more fundamental about the why question. With that, we have to close, and I thank you very much for this opportunity to talk. Appreciate the questions and the comments, and am enjoying the visit I'm having here today. Thanks all.
Thank you.
That's really good talk, actually.
Stop.
I really want to share